Back in the early 90s, by the time I hit the age of 4 or 5, my family was already a Nintendo family. My dad is a major tech dude, so he was always one of the first people to adopt anything new that hits the market. We were one of the first families I know to get a computer, first ones to get Windows 95 and then 98 when it came out. It was like anytime something had hit the market, he would always just spend a bunch of time researching it, reading about it, and then spending about 30 different trips back and forth to the store to confirm that he wanted to buy it. That's always been his style, for as long as I remember. Now, my dad was born in the 50s. He immigrated to the West in the 80s, and while I was born in the early 90s, most of my family was born in the 80s. I got one younger brother, and I were born in the early 90s. So when the NES came out, because my dad was always so intertwined with all the tech stuff going on and would just make regular trips to Best Buy and whatnot, he got my older sisters an NES. I have some very blurry memories of watching my older siblings play with the NES, specifically the 3 Mario Bros. Titles, but by the time I was old enough to hold a controller, we had very much moved on to the SNES. Super Mario World, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Country, these were games that were pretty much always in the console for us. I specifically remember when Donkey Kong Country 2 came out, my dad randomly just popped up at home and was like, "Oh, remember that game we had? Well, here's the second one." The reason this was always so cool is because my dad was, and still is, not even remotely a gamer. I think I have like one memory when I might have been 3.5 years old where I saw him holding a Super Nintendo controller and playing one of the soccer games on there, but I swear that must be the last time he's ever played a video game. But like I said, he was big into tech. I remember we had a surround sound system pretty early on when they first started getting popular. He did buy a pretty big screen TV in the early 2000s. He spent a pretty penny on it, and I am pretty sure the flat screens came out shortly after, so he regretted that purchase. But our living room was effectively a home theater, which was pretty cool. Now, this isn't to say that my dad was extremely wealthy by any means. He was very smart with how he spent his money, always looking for the best deals when available, but I think he genuinely had a weak spot for tech. Also, this is the late 90s, early 2000s. You could have a nice big house with a lot of kids on a single, average, slightly above average income, and still get away with buying whatever you like without putting yourself in any kind of crazy debt. The point is that throughout most of my childhood, we always had a gaming console and we always had a TV, if not 2 TVs, because sometimes we had a playroom and that's where our video games would be. During all of that experience, I always had to share a console with all of my older siblings, which meant that the Nintendo 64 was awesome because now we could play 4 players. Otherwise, I would be lucky to get 15 to 20 minutes in. Eventually, my older sisters kind of like drifted away from video games, so they stopped altogether by the time the 64 came out. And then it was basically me and 3 of my siblings that are closer in age to me that grew up playing video games. But despite that, there was always an issue when I would try to play anything single player. Single player games just did not work in our house. We were too many kids trying to play on a single console, so you'd always have to pass the controller around, and naturally, if we all wanted to play, we would just grab something multiplayer. So games like Mario Kart, Mario Party, all that fun stuff, Beetle Adventure Racing, games like that were always a big hit. But then there are experiences like Ocarina of Time, for example, which I never got to experience as a child because there was no way I would get that much time on a console to be able to beat that game. And that's a big reason why I never grew up a Zelda guy. I started playing Zelda when the Wii came out. But with Mario games, it was different because you could play the game, you lose a life, you pass it to the next person, and so on and so forth. So basically, all of this amounts to me always wanting to have my own gaming console because I think I was the one that was the most passionate about gaming in my family. And one thing that always escaped me and something that I would always think about was a Game Boy. I desperately wanted a Game Boy, just to be able to play games wherever I was without worrying about sharing it with anybody, without having to wait my turn, being able to game during our long car rides. It was just such an appealing concept to me. And it didn't help that obviously I had friends all around me in school that were playing Game Boy. Now, eventually, my older brother did end up getting one of the OG Game Boys, the big gray ones, and we had Pokemon Blue and Tetris. But that was a Game Boy that we shared. So again, you didn't really get that single player experience. It was just when it was available, if you were lucky, you got to play Tetris. And being, the second youngest out of all the kids, I got it very rarely. But to be honest, during that time, as much as I wanted a Game Boy, it wasn't like I was lacking on gaming experiences. Again, like the Nintendo 64 was out, now we're hitting into the late 90s. A lot of my friends were getting Game Boy Colors and it was cool, but like nothing that was really driving me nuts. I'd say right around the early 2000s is when I really started pressing my dad to buy me a Game Boy. I made lists of reasons about why it's a smart decision. I started giving him charts about the difference between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color and why the Game Boy Color was such a worthy investment. Because I always knew that if I talked enough tech with my dad, he'll buy it. And again, this is like the early 2000s, right? He's got computers around him, he's got internet. I know if I speak about this stuff enough, he'll fact check. And he would just kind of show no interest, no matter how much I spoke about it. No matter how much I felt like I was convincing him, he would like shrug it off. Like, you know, the excuses, oh, you already have a gaming console. You and your brothers already share a Game Boy. The color on the Game Boy Color is not real color. What's the difference? They play the same games. You don't need to get a new Game Boy. And look, that sounds like a regular parent perspective, right? That's how most parents speak to their kids. But I am telling you, this dude was obsessed with tech. At the very minimum, even if he doesn't buy something, he would be intrigued by what I am selling. Like, he's the one that explained the joystick to us when the Nintendo 64 came out and told us that we should buy it. It wasn't the opposite. We were at Toys R Us and it was the holiday and we all grabbed a bunch of toys and he was like, well, I'll make you a deal. Instead of buying all these toys, what about this? And there was a display with Mario 64 running around in Whomp's Fortress. And my mind was blown because I had no idea what a Nintendo 64 was. And he was like, well, look, you hold this joystick and you move around. And that was the day we ended up getting a Nintendo 64. So I knew something was off when I was trying to sell him on the Game Boy. And he just was not showing any interest in the discussion. And then, unbeknownst to me, one day he comes home and he's like, I bought you a Game Boy. Right? I'm flipping out at this point, right? I'm doing backflips off the wall, jumping off the couch. Me and my younger brother start dancing in circles because, you know, we got a Game Boy, we got a Game Boy. He's holding the Best Buy bag, puts his hand into the bag, pulls out a console, and it's a Game Boy Advance. And I am not exaggerating. I looked at him and said, you bought the wrong thing. And he started laughing. I legitimately thought this was one of those bootleg Chinese knockoffs that get sent over and it says like 2,000 games in one. But in actuality, it's like 14 games and it's just different levels of difficulty. And I was so upset. I'm like, I told you Game Boy Color. I have been telling you about this for months. How did you go to the store and grab the wrong thing? Are you not listening to me, old man? But then he pulled out, I think it was a Nintendo Power magazine or some kind of magazine that just explained everything about what a Game Boy Advance was. And he told me, he's like, this is the newest Game Boy and it just came out, I think it was a few days ago. Might have been even launch day. Now, he claims that he was just at the store and he saw a bunch of kids lined up with their dad ready to buy the Game Boy. And so he asked the guy at the store what's up and they told him this is called the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. But I don't buy that story at all. I think that's my dad just trying to act cool. You know, parents from that era, they don't really show love the same way. It's kind of hard to explain. Dad's got a big and stoic in nature. You know, my dad was always pretty playful with us, but there was a limit. And he couldn't let you think that he spent so much time researching a game for you for him to buy it for you on the day of. Because, I don't know, then maybe I would think he was gay. I'm not sure exactly what the logic was back then. I'm telling you, the 90s and 2000s were a weird time. Do you know I don't have a single picture of my parents standing together while smiling? How come nobody back then used to smile in photos? Somebody's got to explain this to me. Is that just an immigrant thing or is that just a boomer thing? They could be telling me a story about having the time of their life on their honeymoon or on a random vacation or an outing with a lot of friends and everybody's having a blast, and then they show me a picture and just straight face. Weird, man. I don't understand that generation. But he did buy me the Game Boy Advance, which was awesome. The unfortunate thing, however, is he didn't buy me any games. But now that I had a Game Boy Advance, and my older brother was normally just playing Tetris on his Game Boy, Pokemon Blue ended up getting a lot more attention from me. Now, again, this was the early 2000s, so by this point in time, I had already pretty much beaten Pokemon, as in I had defeated the Elite Four, but now with having Game Boy Advance and Pokemon Blue to myself, I was able to go through the entire game on my own and capture every single Pokemon that you could get without making trades or using cheats or whatever. Although that missing no glitch with the Master Balls really helped my case. Now, I waited a few months for this because I knew that after my dad bought me a Game Boy Advance, if I came back to him and been like, yo man, you didn't give me any games, I would have looked like I didn't appreciate the gift, and you know, you can't do that. But I did notice on the back of the box, Super Mario Advance was a game on here. So I waited a few months, finished Pokemon Blue, came up to my dad, and started the whole selling process all over again. I'm like, yo, this is the Mario game that we used to have on the NES. Do you remember it? Except now it looks better because they ported over the Super Nintendo version. Actually, I didn't say that because I had no idea that anything was a port. I just knew that it was the game where Peach could hover. And this time, he didn't really run around on it. He was just basically like, all right, fine, I'll buy you this game if you just shut up and leave me alone for a bit, you whiny little naggy child. Now, that's not really what he said, but that's what I imagine he thought because I was very persistent. So eventually, he did buy me Super Mario Advance. I loved that game, beat it all the way through. Eventually, I traded it in and I got Super Mario World. And same thing, while I played that game on the SNES, when I played it on the Game Boy Advance, that's when I was able to like fully appreciate that title for the art that it was. And I had like one of those early Game Boy Advances. I don't think I got an SP. Even down the line, I don't recall ever buying one. So despite the fact that the colors were washed out, that didn't really bother me because you couldn't really tell when you were playing on that thing unless you were really looking for the difference. But yeah, that Game Boy Advance was awesome. And it was awesome up until, I don't know, around 2005 or 2006 whenever I ended up getting the DS. But that was all me. By then, I think I had like a job where I could collect some money on my own. I definitely didn't buy it when it came out. I am fairly confident that I ordered it off eBay used maybe a year or so after it came out. But that is a story for another time. I just thought this would be a fun story to share for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're still like, 10 days removed from the launch of a new Nintendo handheld console, and that was my experience with an older handheld Nintendo console. And then obviously it's Father's Day. I don't really have memories of gaming with my dad, like never played any games with him. But this whole story about how I got the Game Boy Advance has always been pretty dear to me, especially because I think that was the last time he might have paid for something for me for video games. After that, my older brother and I would usually do that, and we would just trade in the old stuff and get some new stuff, and it was pretty easy from there. Not to mention you had game rentals, flea markets where you can get a crap ton of games for a very cheap price. Actually, let's put it this way. We had a Dreamcast, a PS2, PS1, Xbox, Xbox 360, and a Wii over a span of like a decade. But I don't know if we ever owned more than 2 of them at the same time, and I don't know if we ever got any of them brand new. But I can tell you for certain, we barely spent any money on any of them except for like the first one that we bought because we would just keep trading in stuff. It was just like really easy to walk into a store and be like, here, take this, give me that, thank you, bye. And I guess you could still do that, but returns were a lot higher back then, like the financial returns. It was cool, especially like when you find some old dude who's just like, here, there's a shoebox of my kid's old games, is in college now. And it's like, holy crap, this is a gold mine. I don't think they realize how much it's worth. And granted, we didn't realize how much it was worth because we don't have any of those games anymore, and now each one is going on price charting for like 250 bucks. But yeah, it was simpler times. Now, seeing as it is Father's Day and I'm about to go out and do a bunch of stuff with the family, I figure I would tell you guys what I got as a gift. Because if you guys remember, I said that I was pretty sure that my family was going to be getting me a Nintendo Switch 2. And I was right, but one of my family members that actually watches my videos pointed out to my wife that I am doing this whole boycott thing on YouTube, so it would not look good if I was to get a Switch 2. So instead, they got me a Switch OLED. Yeah, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Switch OLEDs right now are going for like 200 or 250 bucks. I found out today when I was scrolling on Reddit, actually. They're going on clearance all around. So like if you're able to sell your original Switch and pick one up, you're looking at an upgrade for like less than $100 at this point. But I gotta say, I think that was a great gift. Because I always just wanted a Switch that can play all of my Switch 1 games and make it just look better. I wanted one that had the exact same menus, the exact same titles, the exact same settings, with nothing really new or interesting on it, without having to overpay for it for no ridiculous reason because it's the exact same experience, and I effectively got that with the Switch OLED. An excellent Father's Day gift, I must say. And the best part is, now I can just make more videos reviewing Switch 2 games because they're all Switch 1 games and they're just gonna look even better on the OLED. I am ecstatic. Okay, I won't actually do any OLED videos, that's just me being humorous. But yeah, I wholeheartedly am looking forward to spending the rest of the day with my wife and kids. My wife took them and went to the store earlier. I assume they're buying balloons or something, but we're supposed to be heading to a friend's house for a barbecue in a bit. So I figured it would be worth just coming out here for an hour, getting this video out of the way, talking about Father's Day, talking about all things gaming, and wishing all of you dads a happy Father's Day, and hoping that your day is as enjoyable and blessed as mine. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.